All right, geez, guys. Okay, so I've had you telling me over and over to make a Datapack dimensions tutorial, so today I'm actually going to do it. Now, before I get into this, just know that dimensions are highly unstable, and they are subject to change, as said by Mojang, which is why I've kind of held out a bit on it. But I think it's at a decent spot now. If it does change, I'm going to probably private this video and make a new one. But anyways, what we're going to cover today is making dimensions that are, like, I'm not going to cover what you can do when you're making dimensions as per se, but more of what their capabilities are, what you should use them, what you shouldn't use them, and how to get basic ones into your data pack. Anyways, so I am actually in a dimension right now. So if I do execute in, then I can see all the dimensions available. I have overworld, nether end, and DG floor 0. This is just a side project I've been working on that uses the advantage of dimensions, and I just wanted to be in one so you can see what it looks like when you're in a dimension. This is a void dimension. These are all the ones we're going to be making today, but you can make pretty much any type of dimension that you want, and there's a lot of things you can do, especially in the snapshots for 1.16.2. So we're going to just hop in right away with a dimension data pack. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of it. So we have a folder called dimension tutorial. This will act as our data pack. We got the pack in the data, pack.mc meta. I'm not going to cover how to make these things. I'm sure that if you're watching this, you've made data packs before. I'll put a link to a starter pack in the description. Anyways, so we have Minecraft and my dimensions, so your namespace and the Minecraft namespace. Now the difference here is normally you would put your stuff under your namespace, but today we are putting dimensions under the Minecraft namespace. And then once you go under Minecraft, you have dimensions and dimension type. Dimensions is going to list all of the dimensions you have. Dimension type kind of lets you group sets of dimensions that act the same way, so you don't have to retype things too often. Anyway, so in dimensions, we actually need another folder, not just straight up, to specify our place. So my dimensions is our namespace, so we'll just keep the same namespace. But I think you can put a namespace here different to the namespace here. This is just how you organize. So you have your folder and then you have your dimensions. If you didn't do this, if they didn't have this namespacing system, then if you had two data packs that also had dimensions, they would overlap or whatever, and you might have problems. But now you have the namespacing, so you're fixed. Anyways, and then you also have dimension type, so you need your namespace as well. So my dimensions. Okay, so we're going to put a dimension in here. One good website is miso.github.io. He has a world settings generator. He also has a newer generator that has some of the 1.16 stuff in it. But we're just going to go to this one for now. So in this generator, it has a bunch of stuff. So we're going to remove all these dimensions. We're not adding those dimensions. Now let's add a new dimension called void. We add it, okay? And there's a ton of things. You guys can test around with this stuff and figure out what works best for you. So we go to generator type, we pick super flat, and now you have basically no more things that you can choose here, except for generator settings, in which you can pick it to be the void. And that's pretty much all you need. So if you copy this, it will look exactly like this with maybe a different seed. So we have, and then we also have this additional thing that is type. So I'll copy this here just so you can see I'm not doing any hand waving. So this creates it like that. Now what I found is that, so his generator doesn't always work 100%. Sometimes it'll get confused because you're missing something. So what I do is I have this, which will be in the description, obviously. And I basically set the layers to have air with height of 0. You could probably just leave this as an open like that, but I'm just doing it like this because I know this is what works. There's a lot of kind of ambiguity. For example, structures. If you don't have this field, then in your world, basically if you don't say there is at least a blank structures, then it will generate the end portals, and like a bunch of them. Every single 5 blocks you'll have an end portal, one of the end ruins. But anyway, there's some ambiguity. This is what I found works. Obviously there's probably another way to get it working, but you can just use this. It shouldn't be any performance differences. So I have these things pre-baked already on my desktop, so I'm just going to drag void into the dimensions. When you make your world, I mean, his generator will generate default worlds just fine. That's what I found. So now that we have our void dimension, we have to talk about dimension types. So this is just additional settings to your dimension that specify whatever is in this folder. So you have ultra warm, so whether it's ultra warm dimension, infiniburn, and you can go to the wiki and see what all these mean. But this is just going to set up a standard void information, logical height 255, obviously. And I don't think you could, logical height doesn't mean build height, so you can't exploit that to build above 255. Okay, so now we're just going to go into the dimensions types in the namespace, and we're going to put the void type in here, just like that. Okay, and you can see that in this, it's referencing the type of my dimensions : void type, just like that. I think you can have subfolders as well, so you could add subfolders here, so you could have like test and then slash. So that should establish a void dimension in our 1.15 world, or whatever world you throw the data pack in. So I'm going to open it up, click play. What should happen is it will read the world data and tell me you are using something experimental. So you say, I know what I'm doing, because hopefully you do, but maybe you don't exactly know what you're doing. And it's a good sign if you see that message. So I can go datapack disable, and I can see things that I have enabled and disabled. So I have dimension tutorial enabled. So now I can do execute in, and it'll tell me the dimensions. So my void run tp at s 000, and let's go with 10, and that will put me above the void. So you can see this is a void dimension standard. You can see all the information here. This is going to get you basically the end of this tutorial. Now I'm going to actually talk a little bit about when to use these. So and how to use them. So obviously you have this in command, which lets you go somewhere else. But here's a problem. If I go in, execute in void run say hi at e. There's an area effect cloud in the void. How did it get here? Okay, so you have some issues here. You have some obvious issues here. At E does not mean everything just in the dimension I'm in. So you have to specify some stuff. So you can do the lazy way, which is my way, and I do distance equals 0 ... And now it'll only say me, not the area effect cloud, because the area effect cloud's in another dimension. So anytime you use at E or at A, you need to add distance 0 ... unless you already have like a distance selector that you're using like this, because your command just does that on its own. Another thing that you could do, where you would just add to basically all of them as well, would be a predicate check. And the predicate check can check if you're in that dimension. That one's probably more efficient than the distance. So I'd go for that if you're not lazy. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that you'll be able to select everything in every dimension, not just because you. Okay, so now back in this dimension, I'll talk a little bit about what these can be used for. So I wouldn't use these to run a server. So you may think like, oh, now I can have like one minigame in each dimension and have a ton of minigames on a server. The thing is, processing power is still split, so you're going to get entity lag the more things you add onto it. Now, when you should use this in a server or for a minigame is to have multiple world saves, levels. So let's say that you have like, levels or maps. I mean, levels or maps. So let's say you have like a mini game, and here's your lobby, and then you have a second dimension for map 1, and you have a second dimension for map 2, and you can make people vote on what map to play, and when the map gets generated, you execute in that dimension and do everything there. Now, the advantage of having parallel things like this, as opposed to, I mean, sure, your file size might get a little bit bigger, but it's pretty much the same, the region files. So the advantage of doing this essentially allows you to, let's say in your whatever minigame this is, you always have something happening at 0, 64, 0 or something, right? Then you have an easy way to have constantly the same coordinates, and all that matters is which dimension you're in. Execute in, right? So you can have some nice parallel systems like this, where everything is at the same kind of coordinate places, but they look different, as opposed to if they were all in the same dimension, they would be spaced out. So you'd have to have some kind of a system to be like, okay, this entity is marking where this happens, and this entity is marking where that happens. Here you can kind of hard code those things as long as you keep the positions the same, but it's easy to keep the positions the same because there's multiple dimensions. Another thing you could do with dimensions is just like single small things. So let's say you have a survival world, and then you have like a world where people can mine stuff, like a full of stone and caves world. That kind of stuff can be useful because it doesn't require you to have a new server, because you're not really doing anything intensive in that extra world. So you should have extra worlds whenever you want more options for similar tandem things. So you want coordinates to stay the same, but you want there to be different things at those coordinates. And you should also use them when you want to have something that is not going to be too intensive or playing all the time, somewhere that not everybody's going to always be in. You definitely shouldn't use dimensions to constitute an entire server's multi-server network. So I definitely on my server, I wouldn't say, okay, I can change from having multiple servers in my multi-server network to having everything in one server. That would not be a good idea. You would actually spend more money making this server have enough RAM to support itself than you would having multiple servers with lower amounts of RAM, just because things scale, costs get more and more. So you go from like $250 for 2 gigabytes, and then you go like $5 for 4 gigabytes, and then you go like, $20 a month for 6 gigabytes. I mean, most servers are not going to be linear scale with the RAM sizes. So a lot of times it's better just to have parallel servers. So kind of just the overarching idea here is that we have access to making new dimensions, we have access to making custom biomes and custom structures, but that doesn't mean that it can replace everything that we used to use. It doesn't mean that it can replace multi-server networks. It doesn't mean that it can replace systems where you divide up power between servers, and it definitely needs to be used cleverly and properly, or else you're going to have even more bugs than before. Just because of unintended things such as the distance equals issue. You may run into problems that you didn't before. So they're both a blessing and a curse, and it'll be really cool to see what people do. Obviously, somebody's going to make some multi-noise, aka 3D biomes, because that's a thing, and they're going to do some like crazy, Terraria level world gen, which is going to be awesome. But as for people like me and people like probably you that work on mini games, work on maps, this is more of just like an additional utility so that you can have different variants of something. At least that's the way I see it. Custom dimensions aren't super helpful for mini games, but they do allow easier map creation for multiple maps. Anyways, that was it, guys. I have a ton of stuff. I mean, you probably already saw when I typed /datapack or when I looked in my world saves. I have a lot of mini games that I worked on and just have not polished up and released, and that should come out soon, as soon as the bugs are all pressed out. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.